Hello and welcome back to Bookish. It's Tag Tuesday, so I'm here with a tag. This is the I Wanna Believe tag, and it was created by Ramsey over at the Channel Rajathon, and it's all about the, I guess, 90s TV series, The X-Files. I was tagged by the fellas over at Codex Cantina to do this, and before I get started, I have to make a confession. I've never watched a single episode of The X-Files. So, Scully, Mulder, no idea. For the most part, I have no idea what these prompts are talking about, but fortunately it all gets down to asking you about books, and that I do have some idea about. But since I don't know what all these things are, I'm going to read the prompts to you off my phone because they're very in-depth, and they reference the show, and many of you will understand what the prompts are about, even though I don't. So prompt number 1 says, Pilot, a great beginning to a series or trilogy. This is a series of books I've talked about before, and that's the Aubrey Maturin series of historical fiction set in the British Navy in the late 18th, early 19th century, and the first one of those is Master and Commander. And this book, if you have an interest in historical fiction and naval history and battles and just really well told action sequences, this book should hook you, and it is the first in a series of 21 books, and it's my favorite historical fiction. So that was my answer to prompt 1. Prompt 2 says, Squeeze, Toombs was my favorite monster in the series. Who's your favorite monster in a book? Well, I'm going to kind of fudge a little bit on the rules here, because this monster really probably wasn't in a book until after the movies were made and then put in a comic book, and that's Gamera from the old Japanese 1950s, 1960s kind of monster movies that included Godzilla and Mothra and all kinds of stuff. Gamera was my favorite. If you're not familiar with Gamera, Gamera was a flying turtle from outer space, I think, or a flying turtle which could live in outer space. And so those Japanese movies with the kind of monster movies destroying, Tokyo over and over again, those were some of my favorite things to watch when I was a kid growing up on Saturday afternoon, and so Gamera is my favorite monster. And then I think later he was put into a series of comic books. Maybe he was before. Somebody who's more of an expert on that can tell you. I'll try to put in a little picture of Gamera over here so you'll know what I'm talking about. Prompt number 3 is the ErlenMeyer Flask. The one where they find a baby alien. What's the best sci-fi book you've ever read? I'm going to go with His Master's Voice by the Polish science fiction writer from the 1950s and 60s, Stanislaw Lem. This involves scientists who are listening to and signals coming from outer space. They pick up on a signal which they decide is coming from an intelligent civilization living outside of the outside of the Earth's atmosphere, and they decode it. It leads to the creation of something they called frog's eggs, which is actually anyway. This book has some good science fiction stuff, but essentially it also asks all kinds of questions about science and ethics and morality. It's just a really good book. I read this for the science fiction as literature class that I took when I was in college, which is probably really in lots of ways the beginning and the ending of my science fiction reading, but I did like that book quite a bit. Prompt number 4, Clyde Bruckman's final episode. This is the only episode that won an Emmy. What is your favorite book? I'm going to go with James Baldwin's In Another Country. If you asked me a different time, I'd probably have a different book to hold up right now, but I'm going to go with this. I just finished reading my 4th James Baldwin novel, Giovanni's Room, and the more Baldwin I read, the more astounded I am that I'd never read anything by James Baldwin before, and I'm going to pick this as my favorite book because I think it perfectly captures a moment in American history in the late 50s and all kinds of issues about sex and sexuality and race. It just was just a really, really great book. I read this as a buddy read with Sean, the Book Maniac, in February, and it was great. Let's see. Prompt number 5. Jose. It says Jose Chungs from Outer Space. A funny abduction episode. What's the funniest book you've read? Okay, well, I was going to choose Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I saw Jason over at Byways in Booklands had chosen this, so I decided to stomp all over his territory and mention that I think the Roddy Doyle series about the rabbit family are funny books, and I think the funniest one is this one, which is The Van, in which Mr. Rabbit and his friend by Mr. Chippy Van and all kinds of stuff happens. I think Roddy Doyle's novels are funny. I thought these were really amusing and I enjoyed it, so I'm going to take that one as my funniest novel I've ever read. Prompt number 6, Home. This episode was very disturbing and was never re-aired. What's the most disturbing thing you have ever read? That would be Roberto Bolaño's 2666, and in particular the section which is entitled About the Crimes or the Crimes. I can't remember exactly what it's called. Yes, it's part 4, the part about crimes. This basically is set in Mexico, in one of the northern towns in Mexico, during which there were the murders of young women became incredibly common, and it essentially goes through and talks about the murders of, if not, I would say dozens of young women under all kinds of different circumstances, and the description of the crimes and the bodies and what happened is disturbing enough. But what is, I think, the most disturbing thing, and in lots of ways I think it's the most effective part of what I'm going to call a relatively uneven novel. Go ahead and at me. It's the most effective part because as a reader you become numb to these sections to a certain extent, and at some point you just go, okay, here's another one of those horrible murders. I'm going to read through this. And they don't register on you, which I think as much as they should, which I think is the point, how we become numb to violence against girls and young women and how common these things are. Let's see, prompt number 7, Postmodern Prometheus. This is a black and white Frankenstein style episode. What's your favorite classic book? You know my favorite classic author is Honoré de Balzac. I chose in one of his novels that I don't think I've mentioned in this category before, and that's A Harlot High and Low. This is a great follow-up to Balzac's novel Lost Illusions and the story of Lucien Bonpré, is it Bonpré? Something like that, and his adventures, trying to climb to wealth in Parisian society. It's got the criminal Vautrin in it, and it's just a really, really good story. You don't, by the way, have to have read Lost Illusions to enjoy A Harlot High and Low, but I think that is, as with most Balzac novels, one of my favorite. Prompt number 8 is Bad Blood. In this episode, Mulder kills a vampire, or he thinks he does, and then tells the story all in flashbacks. What's your favorite way they use flashbacks to tell a story? Well, I'm going to assume this means a book, and so I'm going to talk about my favorite flashback book that I read relatively recently, which is Somerset Maugham's The Razor's Edge, which essentially is all told in flashback, with Maugham himself featuring in the novel as a character, both the narrator and a character in the novel, and I found this to be really, really good, and it surprised me in lots of ways, not the least of which is the author as a character telling the story in flashback kind of ways. Alright, prompt number 9 is Drive. A man jumps into Mulder's car and they speed through the entire episode. What's an episode or a book that was just kind of a non-stop ride for you? I'm going to go with Get Shorty by Elmore Leonard. Elmore Leonard is a great writer of crime, thrillery fiction, and I really like this book. It's the first Elmore Leonard I read, and I think I read it from cover to cover in one sitting, which is really unusual for me because I am a slow reader. Prompt number 10, Milagro. In this episode, a book becomes reality when the author writes it. What is a book setting you would never want to go to? That would be the Siberian Gulag, in which the title character in One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich by Solzhenitsyn lives. I don't want to live in a Russian prison camp in Siberia. So that would definitely be a setting I don't want to visit. So the bonus prompt is to name your favorite sidekick character in a book, or favorite side character in a book. So I'm going to go with Lisbeth Salander from The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I realize she's the title character, but she's not actually the main character. in this book. It's a Swedish journalist, and while I think a lot of this book is overly economically politicized, it's a good book, and Lisbeth Salander is one of those great kind of avenging characters, and one of those great unexpected characters. And no matter, I think, what you think about those books, I think she is a side character worth remembering. Anyway, there you go. There's my version of the I Want to Believe tag. Thanks to the fellows at Codex Cantina for tagging me to do this. I will leave a link to everybody's channel down below. I look forward to your comments in the comment section, and as always, thank you for watching.